Hey there, welcome back to the BOM Process course. We are still in Module 2 where we're talking about the importance of having a process to help you understand kind of how to do all of the different things. Now, in the last lesson, we talked about the importance of focus. Now, in this lesson, we're going to talk about why you need to focus on the right thing at the right time. And this might seem kind of obvious, but I do want to help you understand why trying to rush to do things too early is often a mistake. And we can go back to the analogy I started with in the last lesson where I talked about that magnifying glass and how if you have a magnifying glass and you really focus the light of the sun onto a single spot, you can start a fire. But what I didn't mention is that with a typical magnifying glass at least, you couldn't do that if you were focusing that light onto a big log. No, instead, you have to focus that light onto the paper, which is then under the kindling, the small wood, which then is under the bigger logs. And the notion of that is focusing your energy on the right thing, on the thing that you have the power to change at that moment. That you have the tools to change at that moment is important. And that's the only way to get results. Now, another way to look at it or think about it is that you have to crawl before you can walk, and you have to walk before you can run. And it's the same basic concept in building your business. There's a couple of pieces here. Number one, you need to make sure that you've built a little bit of kind of muscle memory and the skill set before you move on to more advanced things. But just as important, and this is going back to that magnifying glass, part of what it is building up, getting yourself the right tools, the right prerequisites so that you're ready for the next task, to make the next task successful. Because oftentimes, if you do things out of order, if you focus on a task that maybe you shouldn't be focusing on because you are a year away from it in your business where you really should be doing that, you might actually do something right, but it'll seem to fail because you didn't have the right elements in place. In other contexts, actually focusing on those advanced tasks will hurt your business in the moment by draining some real resources out. So I wanted to give some examples here to really make this concrete. The example I use over and over again, and I want to be clear, this is not the only one because I'm going to give you a bunch of other examples. But one example is building an online course or a membership or some other kind of scaled program when you have no audience. When you have maybe 50 people on your email list and saying, you know what, I'm going to create an online course. Well, I'm just going to tell you, that's not what you should be focused on at that moment. And there's a lot of reasons for that one, which is partly you don't have an audience to sell it to. You haven't proven your messaging, your concept. You haven't dialed that in yet. You don't have a big enough audience to really crowdsource and do the research to understand what they actually want and need. So the chances are you're going to create the wrong product that won't help your people, and you're not going to be able to sell it because you can't message it right and you don't have an audience to sell it to. So that's like one small example, but there are lots of other ones. For example, spending a bunch of time and effort building your email list, like creating great freebies and opt-in pages and doing that and using Facebook ads to get people to sign up for your freebies, but then not having a plan to email them and nurture them. And I see this over and over again, and I sit there and I say, well, why'd you spend all that money getting them on your list if you're not going to do anything with it? It's not going to do you any good. So see, you have to build those systems before you actually invest and put a lot of time and effort into building your list. But another example we could talk about is I see people do this in our space. They are not making any money in their business yet, and they go out and hire people because people are saying, hey, you need to outsource, you need to delegate, you need to focus on the $10,000 an hour tasks and things like that. And I'm like, hey, that's great when you don't have time to work on the other tasks. But the reality is I'll literally see people who get a job or keep their job so that they can pay people to do work in their business. And so that's another example of how they're hurting themselves because they're literally not spending their time in their business. Instead, they're doing something else. So that's another example. But while we're talking about hiring, one example I have to talk about is I will see people come into to Facebook groups and say, I want to hire an integrator. And I'm like, well, who's on your team right now? Oh, nobody. I have a bunch of contractors. I'm like, you don't need an integrator. Now, if you don't know the term integrator comes from the EOS system, which is where you have a visionary and an integrator. And most entrepreneurs say, hey, I'm the visionary. I want an integrator who's kind of my chief operating officer and all these other things. But the key element is if you don't have anything in your business, if you don't have other team members, you don't have anything to integrate. The integrator's role is kind of to put everything together to make sure that's working. So you're not ready for that yet. And if you go out and try to hire someone who's doing that, number one, you're going to be paying way too much to get an employee to do the doing. And that's hurting your business. But another more subtle example that I'll see is people who will spend, and this isn't even necessarily, by the way, about focusing on the wrong thing, but it's an example of the mindset problem. They will join a program. Like I've had people who wanted to join my high ticket coaching program, but doing so would mean they had no money for Facebook ads, for anything else to actually implement what we would be talking about. And I said, no. I told people not to join and wouldn't let them join my coaching program in that context because I recognized that, hey, if you join my coaching program, I can help you with implementation. But if you don't have money, if you don't have the resources to do any of the stuff we're going to be talking about, it's not going to work. And so the important point here is that you need to recognize that oftentimes we have to slow down. We have to work on things that maybe are not the fun, exciting, sexy things we want to be working on, but they are the building blocks. And so that's why you have to be focusing on, you've got to build the foundations for your business before you move on. You've got to build the revenue, get to the point that you're making money before you worry about building a team. This is why in Module 1, when I talked about the operations team, I said, look, you want to keep your operations machine lean at the beginning. You only want to build it to the extent necessary because you don't want that to be something that is sucking the money out of potentially spending on marketing, on reinvesting, on making money. And so this is the importance of focusing on the right thing. Now, that's hopefully gotten you understanding and convinced that you do need to focus on the right thing. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to talk about why I can't give you a rigid checklist and why anyone who claims that they can give you literally a rigid checklist that will say, hey, all you have to do is check these things in a routine manner or just like, a rote manner, that's the key to success. And why, in reality, all I can give you is something more of containers for what you should be doing. So that's what we'll be talking about in the next lesson, and I will see you there.